Hello Frosties! Today I bring you a video covering all things Frostmage in Vault of the Incarnates. I will cover talent setups, rotation, individual boss encounter breakdowns, and more, plus some tips and tricks I've picked up along the way. In my previous guides, I've noticed how some people find written information just as helpful. If you would like a written form of the topics I cover in this video, please check out ToeGrinder's Mage Hub website. Bookmark this site immediately. It will be your primary resource for all things Mage, including up-to-date sims and other useful information. There's also the All-to-Time Mage Discord, which is an extremely helpful place for those wanting to ask questions and have discussions. Links to both are in the description below. This video is sponsored by Hero Wars, one of the highest rated mobile RPG fantasy games. There are tons of unique characters to collect and train, from cyborgs to vampires. My personal choice is Chaba. Look at him! Find your favourite champion in Hero Wars today. Okay, let's jump straight into it. First things first, let's talk about talents. The first talent setup is going to be the main one you run for most bosses. It's strongest for single target and cleave. The second talent setup sacrifices some single target for AoE. You might be familiar with this setup in Mythic Plus dungeons. You remove Deep Shatter, which buffs your Frostbolt damage against frozen targets, and Frozen Touch, which grants you increased proc chance, to opt for Freezing Rain, which makes Blizzard instant cast while Frozen Orb is active, and Ice Caller, which makes Blizzard ticks reduce the cooldown of Frozen Orb. The import string for both talent builds are linked in the description below. If you would like a generic trinket list, please go to ToeGrinder's Mage Hub. As for stats, stat weights and individual stat percentages are a thing of the past. You do not aim for specific percentages of stats, nor will looking at another mage's stats give you any useful information. The truth is, the stats for Frost all work off of each other nicely and are extremely close. The very light and generic priority being intellect, mastery, crit, haste, then verse. All you basically want is more stats. Plus, with the large intellect stat budget on items, usually item level will be an upgrade regardless of what stats are on the piece. The only way to accurately tell which gear is an upgrade for your character specifically is to sim each new piece of gear you acquire through Raidbots TopGear. So let's have a look at how to do that. Just like Mythic Plus, there's no foolproof way to sim encounters specifically. Usually, the default sim settings are the best way. Mage APLs aren't built for hectic ad cleave, light movement, and the rest. Please always select patchwork to make sure the sim gives the most accurate results. One boss can be selected unless you're simming for Primal Council, in which you can change this to 4 targets. In the other encounters, even though there are other targets, you should always focus on boss damage as you have natural cleave built in through your talent setup anyway, so I would always keep this at 1 boss target. Make sure you have set the correct settings for things like trinkets if you are using them. Before moving on to boss encounter breakdowns, let's go through the Frost rotation. The rule of thumb for Frost is to use everything on cooldown, with some minor min-max priorities on your procs and spells. Icy Veins is your main cooldown, which when used grants you haste. Rune of Power will place a rune on the floor which increases your spell damage by 40% while you stand within 8 yards. The range is deceptively forgiving for rune, you do have some leeway. Icy Veins will automatically drop a Rune of Power when used. You'll also get a cast of Rune of Power. Frostbolt is your filler spell, which has a chance to grant you Brain Freeze Flurry procs and Fingers of Frost procs. When you use Flurry, always Frostbolt before launching it, then always Ice Lance twice after. Flurry leaves a debuff on the target called Winter's Chill, which causes the next 2 spells on the target to act as if frozen, hence why you press Ice Lance twice after. Free procs, yay! The reason you Frostbolt before is because the 3 Flurry projectiles refresh Winter's Chill to 2 stacks, and Frostbolt hits before the last Flurry projectile. Effectively, you shatter 3 spells instead of 2. Fingers of Frost procs make your Ice Lance deal triple damage as if the target is frozen, shattering it. Use Fingers of Frost procs when you get them and try to not press Ice Lance without a Finger of Frost proc. The opener would be as follows: Precast Frostbolt, then use Flurry and immediately press Icy Veins after, double Ice Lance, then follow your usual rotation. The reason you squeeze this Flurry out before the Icy Veins is because your talent, Snap Freeze, grants you a Brain Freeze and Fingers of Frost proc when you press Icy Veins, so you don't want to miss out on this Brain Freeze proc by already being capped with 2 flurry charges. If you are in the situation where you have both Brain Freeze and Fingers of Frost procs and are currently casting Frostbolt, continue the Frostbolt cast, then use Flurry and Ice Lance. Sometimes proc munching is unavoidable and cancelling casts is a bigger DPS loss overall. Remember, the general rule of Frost is to press everything on cooldown. Side note, did you know Hero Wars has over 100 million players? In a world of 6 unique modes, you can play alone or with friends, on both mobile and PC. Be sure to check out Titan mode and become a legend. Play Hero Wars now. Link in the description. The first encounter of the raid is Eranog, which is primarily single target with some occasional adds. On Heroic, these adds won't last very long with the smaller health pool and the other DPS hitting them, so treat them as passive cleave for your Orb and Ice Lance. On Mythic, the adds live longer with the much larger health, so it can be worth to add Blizzard to the rotation at 3+ targets. Use it as a filler over Frostbolt if it's off cooldown. Terros is a pure single target patchwork fight. Pretty simple. The largest hurdle here will be optimizing your movement. Frost is a consistent flat damage profile plus an uptime spec. That means inefficient and unnecessary movement will really hurt your DPS. If you find yourself struggling on single target or boss encounters in general, the best thing I can suggest is to record yourself playing and watch it back. 90% of your movement will be subconscious and you really won't realize how much you move until you watch yourself playing. Speaking of movement, the next fight is Sennarth. This fight is primarily single target with some passive add cleave. This fight will be the one to test your movement. Try and stay ahead and plan where you need to be and when. Panicking and running around like a headless chicken will only hurt your DPS. Even though there are potentially more than 3 mobs up at a time, they are mostly spread and die quite fast, even on Mythic. So I wouldn't recommend pressing Blizzard and just do your usual single target rotation. I would also recommend getting your orb out as fast as possible on pull for the adds. Next up is Kurog Grimtotem. This fight has a lot of cleave. Luckily, cleave is naturally built into our kit, so we would still run the single target talent setup. This fight can be a bit of a DPS check, especially on Mythic, so the boss damage will still really matter, even though arguably there are times where there are a few targets up. The Primal Council is a 4-target fight. This is probably the only fight in the raid where you would run the more AoE focused talent build mentioned at the start of the video. Link to the import string in the description below. There are arguments to be made for further reducing your single target and opting for more AoE. Removing the Wintertide talent, which increases your Frostbolt damage and your Ice Lance damage to frozen targets, and taking Snowstorm. Snowstorm is used in very heavy AoE dungeons and is arguably considered pad damage. It's also linked below. Use as you see fit. Dathea is probably one of the more difficult encounters in the raid mechanically. It has a lot of movement, especially on Mythic. The single target setup is what you would run. However, if you are on Mythic and you're one of the platform groups and damage is needed there, you can run the Wintertide build. Even though the encounter is movement heavy, I still recommend Shimmer over Ice Flows, even on Mythic. Ice Flows for Arcane and Fire has some value due to the lengthy casts. Like hard casting Pyroblast, for example, Arcane potentially loses significant damage if you have to move in the burst window, so Ice Flows provides a ton of mobility and use. For Frost, however, there aren't such occasions. Small positioning adjustments are easy to move for and deal with, especially with the amount of free procs you get as Frost. For all the movement heavy mechanics, Shimmer will take you the distance required to deal with it. Not to mention the Ice Flows also scales really badly for Frost. The more haste you have, the shorter your cast, so the less distance you cover. Frostbolt is already a short cast. I would always suggest working on your movement rather than plaster fixing bad movement with Ice Flows. Oh yeah, I almost forgot. Here's a question for you. Where can you get 30,000 coins, 600 emeralds, and 5 awesome heroes to start dominating in Hero Wars right away? Too slow? The answer is in the link in the description below. Play Hero Wars now. The penultimate boss of this raid is Broodkeeper Diurna. The talent setup you would run would usually be the single target setup, as the boss damage most definitely matters. However, if you're on Ad Squad and it needs more damage, you can opt for the Wintertide build. This setup might be seen higher on logs, but that's because people are padding on the ads. Just bear in mind, boss damage most definitely matters on this fight and make the call for yourself. Rounding off the raid, we have the final boss, Raszageth. This fight does have a lot of adds that spawn in the intermissions, however largely on Heroic or below, you would take the full single target setup. this boss hurts. On Mythic, the adds are a lot more dangerous, so you can opt for sacrificing slight single target for the orb cooldown reduction. There are some notable utility talents worth mentioning on the class tree for this fight. Spell Steal can be used to purge the sparks when they come out. It's probably one of the most powerful spells for sniping those sparks far away out of position. Ring of Frost and Blast Wave are also excellent tools for clearing sparks. Blast Wave causes an explosion around yourself, which will knock enemies back and interrupt casts, so it also has uses in the intermissions for AoE interrupting the adds. Those casts can be lethal and you want to interrupt as many as possible. Dragon's Breath fires a cone in front of you which will disorient enemies. Another extremely powerful Mythic Plus utility, which is also handy for interrupting those pesky intermission adds, though it's probably not needed unless your raid leader asks for it. And that's it for this video. Thank you so much for watching. If you found it helpful, give it a like so I know I'm on the right track. If you're an evil fire mage, feel free to dislike. Feedback is always welcome. I love hearing from you guys. Don't forget to check out my Twitch stream linked below. I usually stream my Mythic raids and high Mythic Plus. Until next time, bye bye!